Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Cecilia Samuelsson. Här är våra rubriker. Nederländska bönder protesterar mot klimatpolitiken. Medicinsk abort, hur säkert är det? Tysklands viktigaste ryska gasförbindelse stängs av. Biden avbryter försäljningen av leasingavtal för olja och gas. I Nederländerna fortsätter bönderna att protestera mot regeringens förslag om att minska kväveutsläpp. Försöken att minska utsläppen kan leda till masslakt av boskap och eventuellt stänga ner nästan en tredjedel av landets jordbruk, vilket kan leda till att många försörjningsmöjligheter försvinner. Allt detta vid en tidpunkt då världen förbereder sig för en möjlig global svältkatastrof. Ntd Stefania Cox på Ntd Evening News talade med den nederländska politiska kommentatorn Eva Vlaardingerbroek för att få veta mer.
Eva Vlaardingerbroek, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us, what are these farmers primarily concerned about?
Right, so the farmers are concerned about their land being taken away from them. The Dutch government has recently passed a law that now seems to not even have the proper legal basis, actually, that is going to mean that they're going to have to cut 30% of their livestock before 2030. And the government is selling this as a law that is going to solve a so-called nitrogen crisis, which is a non-existent crisis. Your viewers can go and look the Netherlands up on the map and see that we're a very tiny country that, you know, could not possibly be causing a dangerous nitrogen crisis compared to our neighboring countries who are much bigger that are not subjected to any of these rules. So it's really just a made-up crisis by our government because they want to take these farmers' land.
The Netherlands is one of the world's largest agricultural producers. In addition to farmers' concerns, how could these restrictions impact the country and the global food supply?
Well, the farmers have now, in a response to this new law, been protesting. And one of the things that they've done is they've blocked distribution centers. And they've done that because they want to show our country and also the rest of the world what happens when you shut down farmers. No farmers means no food. And we can see that now in Dutch supermarkets. We've had empty shelves for days. So the immediate effect is very visible to citizens, and the farmers want to show this is what happens when you shut us down. This is not just going to affect us. It's not just our heritage, our land, and our life on the line. It's also yours.
Each day, more farmers are joining these protests and escalating their methods of protest. As you mentioned, they're blocking food distribution centers, but they're also blocking highways and airports. Do you see these measures as a desperate plea for help?
Absolutely, yes. We've had farmers that have sadly already committed suicide because of these restrictions and these regulations, because this nitrogen law is really the straw that breaks the camel's back. But they've been subjected to so many insane regulations that have caused them to have to reorganize their entire farms over and over and over again to now finally oftentimes be completely shut down. I've spoken to some farmers who said, I have a farm that produces just organic meat, and I have to shut down 95% of my company with this. And that farm had been in their family for centuries. So you can imagine that these people are completely desperate, and I can only support them in that, and I understand their cause. Because what would you feel like if someone would come into your house, if the state would say, I'm going to just take 30% of what you own, and you have nothing to say about it?
And how are police responding to these protests?
Well, the police is not on the side of the farmers, which is a very sad fact. And we've seen horrible police brutality already against the farmers that have been protesting, which is very uncommon, or I should say used to be uncommon in the Netherlands over the past couple of years. With the COVID protests, we've seen similar events. But yeah, the police has already shot at a 16-year-old kid yesterday. He was missed by 2 centimeters. So we almost had a child that was killed by the police just for peacefully protesting. He was actually driving away from the protest. So it's really insane what is happening here. And it shows once again that, well, Dutch people who are unarmed, as you should know, stand very little chance to the violence monopoly of our state.
You've said that these Dutch farmers are rising up against what you've called the communist agenda of the global elites. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's communism to the T. If the state comes in and says, I'm going to take away your property for a so-called greater good, I don't know what could be more, essential to communism than that. So it's communism, and I'm saying that it's being done on a global scale because this is part of a bigger agenda than just the agenda of the Dutch government. Yes, it's true that the Dutch government wants the farmers' land for one reason is to house new immigrants, but this is also because they are following an agenda called the 2030 agenda. These are restrictions and climate regulations that are imposed all over the world. So we're being hit hardest right now, and we might be the first ones, but it's very important for other people to know that they could be coming to you next.
As an example of these restrictions, in Sri Lanka, the government abruptly banned chemical fertilizers in an attempt to become 100% organic. Now, a food and economic crisis is devastating the country. Do you think we're going to see more of these policies and protests continue?
Yes. We already see now that in Italy, farmers have gone out on the street as well. In Poland, farmers are going out. So it's spilling over, which is a really good sign because, like I said, these restrictions are going to be very relevant for everyone because it's a global agenda. They want us to eat bugs. They want us to eat the fake meat that they produce. So it's very clear that this is not something that just the Dutch people will be subjected to. And that's why we need your support from other countries.
And what do you think Americans can take away from what's happening in the Netherlands?
Well, from a Dutch perspective, I would say that Americans should be very happy that they have a Second Amendment and that you should protect that with all your strength.
Eva Vlardingerbrook, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Över till Sri Lanka där presidenten flydde landet den 13 juli, bara timmar innan han skulle avgå. Han befinner sig nu i Maldivernas huvudstad. Demonstranter samlas fortfarande på och runt hans kontor.
Rajapaksas förestående avgång inträffar efter att tusentals människor stormade hans och premiärministerns officiella residens under helgen och krävde att det skulle avsättas på grund av deras hantering av en förödande ekonomisk kris. Stämningen i båda bostäderna var festlig på tisdagen när familjer och vänner flyttade in i lokalerna, däribland 51-årige Duncan Ratneake.
The Prime Minister and the President must listen to the request of the innocent people and hand it over to the country's youth.
Presidenten har inte setts offentligt sedan i fredags. Parlamentet kommer att utse hans ersättare den 20 juli. Immigrationstjänstemannen säger att myndigheterna enligt lag inte kan hindra en sittande president från att lämna landet. Men på tisdagen hindrade tjänstemännen presidentens bror och tidigare finansminister Basil Rajapaksa från att fly Sri Lanka. Det var inte självklart vart han försökte bege sig. Rajapaksa-dynastin har dominerat den lokala politiken i åratal, trots att de flesta lankeser ger dem skulden för de nuvarande problemen. En annan av presidentens bröder, Mahinda Rajapaksa, avgick som premiärminister i maj efter våldsamma protester mot familjen. Hans ersättare Ramil Wickremesinghe flyttade inte in i den officiella bostaden och var inte närvarande när demonstranter bröt sig in och satte eld på stället. President Rajapaksas plötsliga avgång på onsdagen markerar en historisk vändpunkt för landet. Ingen av hans familjemedlemmar har längre någon maktposition.
Efter påtryckningar från sitt eget parti undertecknade president Biden den 8 juli en presidentorder om abort. Pro-life-förespråkare kallar orden sorglig och farlig. Ntd's Iris Tau berättar mer.
När president Biden undertecknade en exekutiv order den 8 juli lovar han nya åtgärder för att skydda möjligheten till abort.
We cannot allow an out-of-control Supreme Court working in conjunction with extremist elements of the Republican Party to take away freedoms and our personal autonomy.
Enligt Vita huset syftar den nya orden till att säkerställa tillgången till abortpiller, skydda patienternas privatliv och ge juridisk hjälp till de som söker och tillhandahåller abort. Den kommer också att inrätta en arbetsgrupp som verkar för samarbete mellan olika myndigheter för att ge möjlighet till abort.
And the Department of Health and Service needs to submit a report within the next 30 days to the president regarding the implementation of the order's provisions.
Under tiden använde Biden med hjälp av ett exempel på ett rapporterat fall.
10 years old, raped, 6 weeks pregnant, already traumatized, was forced to travel to another state.
Uppmanar amerikanerna att rösta för att välja dem som stöder abort.
Well, for God's sake, there's an election in November. Vote, 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 vote.
Men ett liknande argument tillbakavisades i veckan av Arkansas republikanska guvernör.
Last year in Arkansas we had approximately 3,000 abortions. A very small percent of those were rape or incest cases. The vast majority are those that did not have any of those exceptions to apply, and so we're going to be saving thousands of lives of unborn children.
It's sad, it's dangerous.
Noah Brandt, chef för regeringsfrågor på en pro-life-organisation, säger att främjande av abortpiller skulle döda fler barn, samtidigt som man ifrågasätter skapandet av en arbetsgrupp för att skapa möjlighet till abort som en del av Bidens order.
That is just so antithetical. Our government does not exist to just be a shill or be a promoter for the abortion industry.
Brandt tillägger att han inte tror att Bidens valbudskap kommer att fungera.
When Americans actually look at what different leaders believe, it's President Biden's abortion up until birth agenda that is extreme and off-putting and will ultimately lose them in November.
Efter den amerikanska högsta domstolens abortbeslut sa president Joe Biden nyligen att lagar som blockerar tillgången till abortmediciner inte är baserade på bevis. Men vad vet vi i dagsläget om abortpiller? Hur säkra är de för kvinnor? En varning, vissa tittare kan uppleva följande bilder som stötande.
My administration will also protect a woman's access to medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, like contraception, which is essential for preventative health care, mifepristone, which the FDA approved 20 years ago to safely end early pregnancies and is commonly used to treat miscarriages.
President Joe Biden intar en tuff hållning mot delstater som förbjuder abortmediciner. Han menar att statliga lagar som kontrollerar kvinnors tillgång till abortmedicin inte är baserade på bevis.
The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists wrote to me and Vice President Harris stressing that these laws are not based on evidence and asking us to act to protect access to care.
American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists anger på sin webbplats att medicinsk abort är en säker och effektiv metod för abort. Men vissa experter håller inte med. Vi har talat med Tessa Longbons, senior forskarassistent vid Charlotte Lozier Institute. Hon säger att enligt en studie var risken för att kvinnor som tog abortmediciner skulle hamna på akutmottagningen mycket större än för kvinnor som gjort kirurgiska aborter. Den studien publicerades 2021 i den faktagranskade tidskriften Health Services Research and Managerial Epidemiology.
And in fact, the rate of emergency room visits increased over the course of the study period pretty dramatically for both chemical and surgical abortion women, but particularly women who had undergone chemical abortions. It increased by 500% between 2002 and 2015.
FDA brukade begränsa tillgången till abortpiller som mifepristone och krävde att de skulle tas i närvaro av särskilda vårdgivare, men så är det inte längre. Longbons sa att abortindustrin under pandemin satte press på FDA och började skicka läkemedlet via post. År 2021 godkände FDA postdistribution, vilket innebär att kvinnor inte längre behövde rådgöra med vårdgivare personligen för att få dem. Longbon sa att för att effektivt kunna göra abort måste kvinnor genomföra en 2-stegsprocess, vilket innebär att de måste ta ett andra läkemedel efter mifepristone. Det här är vad en kvinna kan förvänta sig att gå igenom under processen.
It involves a lot of cramping and bleeding. It's not a fast process. It can take several hours to a few days, and a woman who is undergoing a chemical abortion is really just staying at home, in her bathroom, cramping and bleeding and expelling the unborn baby and the rest of the pregnancy tissue into the toilet.
Ntd har kontaktat American Medical Association och American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, men fick inget svar innan sändningstid.
I spåren av den senaste tidens stora kontroversiella beslut från USAs högsta domstol uttryckte president Joe Biden att domstolen är extremistisk. Rob Nathanson, forskare inom författningsrätt, säger dock att domstolen varken är konservativ eller liberal. Ntd Stefania Cox på Ntd Evening News intervjuar.
Rob Nathanson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steph.
President Biden over the weekend called the Supreme Court extremist. Now, you said in a recent op-ed for the Epoch Times that the Supreme Court is actually no longer conservative and it's no longer liberal. Could you explain what that means?
Sure. We have not had a conservative activist on the court in the sense that we have 3 liberal activists on the court since 1941, when Justice James McReynolds retired. What we have among the 6-justice majority are a collection of philosophies. There's originalism, there's respect for precedent, there's what is sometimes called judicial minimalism, but there's no clear conservative thread. As for the charge that the court is being extremist, I think that's more an indication of where those people who are making those charges are coming from themselves, that they may be the extremists, and therefore they inaccurately perceive the court that way. And we could discuss that if you like.
Yes, in your op-ed you pointed to a trend in the Supreme Court's decisions in previous terms, saying that they've overstepped their bounds in some ways of the traditional role of the Supreme Court justices. And you call it liberal judicial activism. Could you explain how that happened and what it means?
Well, during the 20th century, roughly from about 1940 to 1990, a majority of the court consisted of people who had very liberal ideologies, and they tended to import those ideologies into the Constitution, whether the Constitution really stood for them or not. That ended eventually in part, but until this term, the Supreme Court continued to apply many of the precedents that had been adopted by liberal courts during its most liberal era. It wasn't until this term that you saw a major liberal precedent being overturned, that is to say, Roe versus Wade, and the court began to really edge in a direction other than or away from the jurisprudence that was created in this very liberal activist time. I think a lot of the complaints about the court are not really because the court has been conservative. The complaints are from people who want the court to continue to be a liberal activist court.
And if this trend does continue with this type of ruling, how do you see that affecting the nation?
Well, I think the big unanswered question is whether the court is willing to tackle a big unanswered question, and that is whether Congress has the power to do all the things that Congress purports to do. This term, the court issued a few decisions that curb the bureaucracy somewhat. So, for example, in the case of West Virginia versus Environmental Protection Agency, the court said that the Environmental Protection Agency can't go ahead and restructure the entire energy market of the United States without the approval of Congress. But a more serious question is, does Congress really have the power to restructure the entire energy market of the country? Or does the Constitution's limits on federal power still hold? We'll see if future courts or future terms are willing to address that issue.
And how does this discussion apply to the issues that people are discussing around recent contentious rulings, such as Roe v. Wade?
Well, Roe versus Wade is a good example, and I wrote on this issue for the Epoch Times. The progressive left has a strong political interest in keeping the issue of abortion as a federal issue. If this issue is moved to the states, for various reasons. That's a big loss for them. It works well for them as a federal issue. And so that's why you see the demonstrations, why you also see the suggestion that Congress should intervene with its own regulation of abortion. I don't think that's going to prevail. I think it probably will move back to the states, and then people can, instead of slugging it out against each other in court, they can reason together in the state legislatures about what makes the most sense with respect to abortion policy.
And what do you think can be done moving forward to reach a mutual understanding on the court's intended purpose and to protect that purpose?
That's the role of constitutional education. And when you see the kind of outroar that you saw in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, it's an indication that our education system has failed to educate people about the Constitution and about the proper role of courts. And so that's one reason why I write a column for the Epic Times. It's one reason I'm engaged in constitutional education, because people need to know that that the rule of law requires there be a set of rules. You may not always agree with them. If you want to change them, you go to the legislature, but you don't blame the court for applying the rules that it's supposed to apply. So that's the task of us educators, is to go before the American public and to explain what the public schools apparently are not explaining, and that's the role of the rule of law and of the Constitution in our system.
Constitutional scholar Rob Nadelson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steph.
Nu till Tyskland. Nord Stream 1, den största enskilda gasledningen som levererar rysk gas till Tyskland, har påbörjat sitt årliga underhåll. Flödet förväntas upphöra i 10 dagar, men regeringen, marknaderna och företagen i Tyskland fruktar att avstängningen kan förlängas på grund av kriget i Ukraina, vilket skulle kunna störa planerna på att fylla lagren inför vintern.
Gasflödet från Ryssland till Tyskland genom Nord Stream 1-ledningen upphörde den 11 juli när den planerade 10-dagars underhållsperioden inleddes. Frågan är om flödet sedan kommer att återupptas. Tyskland är oroligt för att detta inte kommer att ske. Klaus Müller är chef för den federala myndigheten som ansvarar för Tysklands gasmarknad.
What happens once the maintenance is done remains to be seen. No one can predict that. Is the maintenance over in 10 days, or earlier, or later? Unfortunately, we have to wait and see.
Müller klargjorde att gasen fortfarande flödar till Tyskland tack vare LNG-terminaler i Belgien och Nederländerna. Europas största ekonomi är till stor del beroende av rysk gas för att driva sin exportledda ekonomi och för att värma upp hushållen. Men landet har förberett sig för ett eventuellt fullständigt stopp av ryska leveranser om Moskva ökar användningen av gas som ett ekonomiskt vapen mot väst. I så fall skulle lagringsutrymmena inte fyllas i tid till vinterns uppvärmningssäsong som bara är 3 månader bort. Förutom Tyskland skulle det sannolikt också förvärra gaskrisen i Europa, vilket skulle kunna leda till nödåtgärder från regeringarna och smärtsamt höga räkningar för konsumenterna. Tyskland har gått över till steg 2 i en 3-stegsplan för nödgas, vilket är ett steg innan regeringen rationaliserar bränsleförbrukningen. Kreml har avvisat påståendena om att Ryssland använder olja och gas för att utöva politiska påtryckningar och har sagt att underhållsstoppet var en vanlig planerad händelse och att ingen har hittat på några reparationer. De europeiska aktierna föll på måndagen på grund av investerarnas oro för energitillgången och marknaderna förbereder sig redan för det värsta.
Yes, we can try to reduce gas consumption and to work more efficiently through saving measures, but we know from all estimates that Germany will not be in a position to quickly compensate for the loss of Russian gas. In other words, we need to prepare not just for a slowdown of the economy, but a serious recession.
De tyska sektorer som sannolikt kommer att drabbas hårdast är den kemiska industrin och glasindustrin. Och det värsta scenariot skulle vara ett fullständigt stopp av rysk naturgas, vilket skulle kunna kosta Tyskland nästan 13% av dess ekonomiska resultat under andra halvåret av 2022.
Biden-administrationen har avbrutit 3 stora oljeförsäljningar, 2 i Mexikanska golfen och en i Alaska. Detta kommer att hindra företag från att borra på över 1 miljon hektar.
Biden-administrationen har avbrutit försäljningen av 3 stora oljeleasingavtal. 2 av dem ligger i Mexikanska golfen och beslutet beror enligt regeringen på motstridiga domstolsbeslut som påverkade arbetet med försäljningen av leasingavtalen. Den andra är i Cook Inlet i Alaska, vilket enligt inrikesministeriet beror på bristande intresse från industrin.
You don't make a predetermined answer of there's no interest without holding a lease sale to find out if there's interest.
Rick Whitbeck är delstatschef för Alaska på Power the Future. Whitbeck säger att leasingområdena ligger i närheten av aktiva producerande bassänger och han tror att det finns enorma möjligheter att hyra ut i dessa områden. Whitbeck tycker att avbokningarna är häpnadsväckande. American Petroleum Institute, som företräder alla delar av USAs olje- och gasindustri, säger att administrationen talar om behovet av större utbud men agerar för att begränsa det. De menar att administrationen saknar viljan att utveckla olja och gas. Samtidigt säger den ideella havsskyddsgruppen Oceana att oljebolagen inte behöver fler leasingavtal och att vi inte kan borra oss ur de höga gaspriserna och det skulle ta år eller decennier innan produktionen kommer igång med de nya leasingavtalen.
They're right, but it's only because of the delay tactics that the Biden administration has put on the permitting side. It takes way too long to process and permit those opportunities.
Det nationella genomsnittliga bensinpriset ligger för närvarande på cirka 13 kronor litern.
Tack för att du har tittat och på återseende.